sanctify Hashem with 3 times saying Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. There are 3 levels of meaning to the words of the Torah that are available to everybody. We say that the Torah is split up pardes, Pei Reish Daled Samach, that you have Perush, which is the straight translation of the word, Remez, which is a hint that is suggested by the words, Drush, which is an analysis of the words and coming up with a concept, and finally Sod, which is considered to be the Kabbalah and is really hidden from most of us. So these are the 3. The Torah itself are the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books. We believe that Hashem dictated all of this to Moshe Rabbeinu in the secular year 2448, 2448, or 1233 in the 1233 in the Goyish calendar, 2448 in our calendar. So when you see here 1273 for Yehoshua, that's 1273 BCE, before the Common Era. About 1200 years before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, approximately, give or take a century, is when the Torah was first given on Har Sinai. 40 years later, or the year 2488, is when Moshe died and Yehoshua took over. The book of Yehoshua covers basically the story of the few years that it took that Yehoshua took over, that they prepared to invade the land, that they invaded the land and conquered the land, and the 14 years that it took until they started dividing the land. And that's how the book is split up, beginning with the story of the Jews approaching the border and starting with the story of the spies that Yehoshua sent to spy out the land, and then one step at a time as he took over the land. Anybody know how many spies Yehoshua sent compared to Moshe? Moshe sent how many spies?
3. 3?
I'm sorry, Susan?
Was it 3 or 4 spies that Moses?
Keep going. 6. How many tribes were there?
12 spies.
Okay, he sent the leader of each tribe.
Oh,
And when you think about it, this is a crazy way of thinking about spies when you get down to it. Spies, you usually get people that are good at, sneaking around or covering themselves up or being hidden or being nondescript. And here, Moshe sent the leaders in a pack of 12, some secret spy mission it was. And that was one of the reasons it was a big disaster. They came back and they spoke Lashon Hara about the land, and the people started crying and whatever. They fell under their spell of we can't do this. And for that, they died over the next 40 years. Yehoshua went out and sent how many spies?
2.
Anybody? Yehoshua sent out 2 spies. Anybody know who they were? He actually reused one of them, Khaled ben Yefuna, who was the one who accompanied him when he was one of the spies. Yehoshua was originally one of the 12. He and Kalev were the only 2 who survived. Of all the Jews who were of 20 years of age when they left Mitzrayim, The only two that entered Eretz Yisrael was Yehoshua and Kalev ben Yefuneh. And these were the two spies. He sent Kalev and he sent, hold on, get to the pasuk. And he sent real spies. They snuck around at night and they showed up at a motel close to the wall and were taken in by Rachav. Anybody know what Rachav's job was?
Depending on how you translate Zona. She was
It's only
either,
really, no matter how you translate it, you're going to end up pretty much with the same concept.
she was either a harlot.
She ran an inn. What she did with the inn and who was there and what they were doing, there are some Mefarshim that say that her fame was celebrated throughout Canaan and most of the known world. She was obviously an artisan at what she did. And she brought in these two spies. Now, let me just find the name of the other spy. I will find it later. But the point is that they went into Rachav, and Yehoshua tells the story. There we go. It was very different in that nobody knew they suspected they were coming. The word had gone out amongst the people in Canaan that the Jews were coming. And therefore they were terrified. And that was one of the things that that Yehoshua wanted to find out, is how terrified were they? What were the people like coming in to the land? And that's what they did. They met with her. They made a deal with her that if she would preserve their secret and let them go, that they would later rescue her and her family, and she was to leave a red string hanging out the window, and that would show that they were there. Anybody know who eventually married Rachav?
Yehoshua.
Yehoshua himself. Rachav, they say, did tshuva. She became Jewish, and she was married to the first leader of the Bnei Yisrael after Moshe. The period of Yehoshua, and we'll get into the Sefer itself over the next few days, but I wanted to just, again, give you a scope of time that we were talking about. We say...
Isaac,
yes.
The two spies were Kalev and Pinchas.
Pinchas, right.
Rabbi Google.
Thank you. Well,
I tried Google and it didn't respond.
Class, so I expect you guys to be on the keyboard while I'm while I'm sort of directing us. We say that Moshe kibel Torah misinai umasrahu Yehoshua. Yehoshua was the one who got the Torah from Moshe. So he was around until 2488. Sorry, that's when he started. And then we say umasrahu l'skenim. that he gave over the Torah to the Zakanim. The Zakanim period only lasted a few years, as you can see, from 2488 to 2516, or again in English years till 1245 BCE. I believe the Goyim called this the Iron Age of the different historical ranges. This was considered the Iron Range. So they accepted that iron tools have been invented and implemented and used, and this was that period. After Zakanim came the Shoftim, starting in 1228, about 1200 years before the destruction of the temple. And here you have the individual of each of the Shoftim. I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on all of them. I'd like to probably start tomorrow, and we will be spending some time on Devorah. We'll be spending some time on Gideon, a drop on Yiftach, and then, of course, on Shimshon. Eli HaKohen, we're doing Shmuel also, right? I think he's been referring to Shmuel. Eli HaKohen is written up in the book of Shmuel, which is what we're doing now with Rabbi Smith. And the story of Shmuel and Chana crying in the Beis HaMikdash, or actually the Mishkan at the time. There was no Beis HaMikdash. And that Shmuel grew up under the leadership of Eli HaKohen, or in the Mishkan, and then later went out on his own. Now, why is this? They made a mistake here. Okay. So you just get a sense of the years and the ranges that each of these people were around. Now, the next thing I thought as a way of introduction is to understand not just the different volumes that were involved, but also different Mefarshim. When we talk about Torah, this is a typical page of Chumash. When we read the Chumash, this is what the page looks like. Now, if some of you don't read Hebrew at all, I'm sorry, but for those that do, I wanted to quickly run through. And this is from a phenomenal book that I was giving out as bar mitzvah gifts to everybody that I could find over the years, called the Codex Judaica, a chronological index of Jewish history. And what the Codex Judaica does is it takes all of Jewish history, including Torah and everything, and superimposes it over world history. So in the times of Chumash or the Nevi'im or even the Ksuvim, we don't have much else to compare to, but certainly later when you get into the commentators or you get into the Talmud or you get into Rashi and who these people were, you get a very vibrant sense of the world that these guys were living in and what they were dealing with as they were preparing what they were preparing. So, as a start, this is section number 1 here, is the Torah itself. These are the words of God, Hashem's dictating to Moshe the Torah word for word. And it's usually the largest text on the page. And I don't know how much you want to get into each of the individuals.
I'm going to go to my mother today at 1 o'clock.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, they're going to pick us up and we're going to go there at 1 o'clock. And then they're going to bring us.
Okay. So that's the Chumash itself. Now, looking at the next page, there should be another page here. Okay. When you have the Mikros Gedolos, this is called the Chumash Mikros Gedolos. These are usually the large volumes of Chumash that have most of the commentaries in there on the page. The smaller Chumashim may have Rashi, we'll point to him in a minute, but the Mikros Gedolos have all the major commentators, and I thought I would go through each of them so you get a sense of the depth of history again of each of these people and when they lived. So the earliest of all the commentators, before Rashi or anyone else.
A minute, Isaac. Can I
I'm
interrupt?
sorry?
Can I interrupt you for just a minute? I want to ask you something. In the back of the Steinsaltz, it has a bunch of Hebrew pages that are all in different, I don't know if it's the Torah they're showing. I don't really know what it is. I'm guessing it's what you're talking about. But I'm honestly not sure. Does anybody know, have the same Steinsaltz? Because in the back, like I said, there's Hebrew pages, but there's no.
Well, I don't have a Steinsaltz, and you can compare later. But for right now, I just wanted to run through the history in terms of the years, the ages that these commentators lived at, and how far they were. So first of all, you have Yonasan ben Uziel, which is marked here as number 2. Yonasan ben Uziel lived, just to get the exact reference, Yonasan ben Uziel was the greatest disciple of Hillel. Remember, we've heard about Hillel and Shammai, the two Tanoim, or actually the greatest of them, that had arguments, and then their schools argued over whatever. His greatest disciple was Yonasan ben Uziel. He wrote a Targum, an Aramaic translation of Navi and of Chumash. And he was in the year 3769 by our count. So using the reference that we had before, in terms of English years, let's just check that. So he was about 1,300 years after Yehoshua is when the Targum was written. Then we have, going back to the other page, Onkelos. Onkelos also was an Aramaic translation of Chumash, but he lived a lot later, 3841. So he was about 100 years or so, 150 years after Yonasan ben Uziel. Rashi, who is the most commonly quoted translator. When I do this, do you see me moving my hand over Rashi or not?
No.
No, you only see the page. So I don't have a pointer here. Wait, maybe I do. I don't know. Okay. Too much for me to learn. Rashi wasn't until 1,000 years later. So you had an incredible gap of time between Onkelos and Yonasan ben Uziel and Rashi. Some of the other commentators we can get into later as we go through some of them, but I wanted to give you at least an image of who these people are. We can separately, the latest ones here are probably the Kliyakar and some of the later commentaries. Sifsei Chachamim were earlier on, Balaturim were earlier on. But these are the various commentators that you typically see people quoting when they're quoting from the Chumash. The Mikros Gedolos on Navi is a little bit different in that, why do I have only a small screen? You have some of the same, but the example page here is from Shmuel, which we're in the middle of. You have the left-hand column, which is Rashi, which is about the year 1100. Yonasan ben Uziel is here also. Where is Yonasan ben Uziel? He is the big chunk. He makes the reverse L. Number 2 is Yonasan ben Uziel, who is one Aramaic translation. And the other one was, you don't have Onkelos here.
Isaac.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to tell you what I see on my screen. Right now, the only thing that I see is basically your desktop that shows us all the different files that you have. So I can't see anything at all. So the only thing I would tell you is maybe to close down your screen. Okay. And then whatever you want us to see, bring that up first and then share the screen.
Okay.
Because if you do it that way, we'll probably get to see it.
Do you see it now?
Now I can
Yes.
see it.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. Again, this is my inexperience of using Zoom and screen sharing.
Yeah, no.
And
So
that's exactly what I was trying to show you in the Steinsaltz book, the same exact thing. Plus it has the common acronyms of all the people you're talking about. It has the acronym and the full name, but no dates, no dates.
No dates, but the history part we can discuss. But I
Yeah.
just wanted to give you an idea of who these people were.
Right.
And over the next few days, as we go through one or two of the commentaries, we can talk more about them.
Right.
But just in terms of the page that we use when we learn Torah or Navi, these are your most common Mefarshim, as it were, that we use.
What is the difference between the columns? Can you explain that?
Yes. The center column is the text of the, let me just, I don't know why I can't, let me see what this does. Does this let me show you? No. It has to be some way of getting a pointer. I'm just surprised. And I don't know. I should know by tomorrow.
why don't you move the point down at the,
does it turn yellow when I touch it now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the text of the Navi itself in the center. Okay?
Okay.
Rashi's commentary, which is the most common from the 12th century, the 1100s, is over here on your top left.
Okay.
The Targum, Yonasan ben Uziel, which we said was the student of Hillel, is this reverse L over here. This is in Aramaic, a translation of this.
Okay. Okay. This is okay. Okay.
Now, the Radak lived 1191. He was a grandson of Rashi.
Yes.
Isaac.
Kimchi.
Isaac.
Sorry? Yes.
Yeah, I think that Susan might be marking her Gemara with these things, and this is Navi. This is not Gemara. She's looking in her Gemara, and trying to correlate the columns.
No.
The columns.
That's
They're
what
not
I
the
thought
same.
this was. That's what I.
No.
No. This is Shmuel. This is Navi. This is what we're talking about. This is the second set of the written parts of the Torah. The 5 volumes of Moshe, Bereshit, Shmos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim, are the Chumash, is what we refer to as Chumash.
Okay.
That was referred to over here. You see it now or not?
No, you're gonna have to do now.
Do
Yes.
the same thing again.
No. Now we can see it.
Now you can see Bereshit.
Right.
So in this case, again, you have.
Wow.
I'll get the pointers down. I'm sorry.
This is incredible. So what you're saying is that people kept adding to the explanation, the original explanation. That's what we're actually reading and looking at.
Correct.
Wow.
Incredible. You started, if anything, let me explain something else. This is something the Goyim give us such a hard time. You look at these Bible commentators and their evaluations based on the way the text is written. This is what it means, or it had to be different authors. When we know of the old world, even during the Renaissance, most of the world could not read or write. The Goyim, and now we're talking about mostly just Europe. I'm not going to get into ancient China, but the known world that we knew at that time was Europe, were basically ignorant. Nobody could read. You had a few leaders, a few people. The priests could read. In the seminaries or in the convents, they could read a little bit. The Jews had almost maximum literacy. Every Jewish kid grew up on his father's lap and learned Chumash. And then when they got older, they learned Navi. And then when they got older, they learned Talmud. So we have an uninterrupted history going back 3,000 years of not only written words that were followed and meticulously copied, in the case of the Chumash, by hand, but handed down father to son. The very tight thing that this was the essence of your life. You woke up in the morning as a kid, the first thing you learned is Moda'ani, and then you learned brachas, and then you learned Chumash, and then you had a Rebbe who taught you and beat you if you missed it, and whatever it was. But the point is, Jews placed a tremendous amount of attention on literacy and thought and reflection, which most of the common world had not done. So in terms of giving you a history of where these people were coming from, you had this coming back 3,300 years. The Chumash itself, why can I not get the, oh, here we go, okay. The Chumash itself was 3,300 years ago. And then you had Onkelos coming in about 1,000 years later, a little earlier, and other commentaries that came much later. Rashi, as we said, didn't come until the year 1200. Rashi didn't come in till 1200. But meanwhile, you had Jonas. I'm sorry?
Just
Now,
mute
the
everybody.
difference also is while Yonasan ben Uziel and Onkelos gave a straight translation, Rashi was one of the first ones that gave explanations, that looked into the Medrash and referred to there and the understanding of a word. He wrote a commentary that, as he put it, a 5-year-old should be able to follow. So it wasn't looking for fancy thought analysis or arguments or things like that. It was basically just to make Chumash and later Navi and later the Gemara. I mean, it's incredible. I thought about when you see all these books floating around of what's our Torah, and I think about Rashi and having to run around with scraps of parchment or whatever papyrus they were using to write. It amazed me how these guys traveled around and kept all this stuff as they were writing. They didn't have word processors. They didn't have cut and paste. They didn't have lookup. They didn't have Google. And yet he managed not only to include the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, but also all of Navi, all of Ksuvim, and whatever. But this is basically where our heritage comes from. And thousands of years of analysis and commentary. We have an unbroken tradition, actually, of commentators going back to the very beginning. Okay. Any other questions on any of that, or anything else that hits you on anything we discussed until now?
That's beautiful. That page is beautiful. The typesetting alone.
Then this is modern typesetting. I wouldn't, it's not too historical on the typesetting. Okay.
They don't put the Hebrew, all they put is how you say it.
I don't know who the they is, so I can't answer you, but obviously thousands of different commentators,
right,
and Sfarim that have been written in recent years, and now you get it all online also, which is a big deal.
Isaac, can I ask you something? Why is on Joshua, is it pronounced Yeshua?
Yeah.
And what?
Because that's his Hebrew name, Yehoshua.
Okay.
And the fact that they turned it into Joshua in English, you got to ask them.
Okay.
I mean, we call the leaders afterwards the Zakanim, the elders. English, it's elders.
I see.
English, it's Joshua. I mean, the same way any of the Hebrew was often transliterated directly, and if not, was, anglicized somehow.
Right. Okay.
So that's why you have that. I mean, any of these names. I mean, Devorah became Deborah. Shimshon became Samson. Shmuel became Samuel in English. You got to ask them why they changed it.
Okay, now I understand.
But these are our original Zakanim that are covered. Okay. So again, the book of Yehoshua itself is really talking about the conquest of the land. The first few chapters talk about how they spied out the land, how they entered the land, the crossing of the Jordan, again with another miracle similar to Kriyas Yamsuf, in that the waters parted so they could pass through. one of the first things they did when they entered the land is they made pillars. And I think they're starting to look around for them somewhere now, around the Jordan where they think they crossed, because the Navi tells us they made 12 stone pillars on which they wrote all of the Torah. They engraved it in the stone and left it over there. Then they did some of the things that Moses told them in the Bible they would be doing. They went to Har Gerizim and Har Avol, the two mountains where half the people stood on one, half the people stood on the other. The Leviim with the Aron stood in the middle, and then they all said, "Blessed is the person who does this," and everybody said, "Amen." And then, "Cursed is the person who does this," and everybody said, "Amen." And in fact, I was just reading recently that archaeological digs around Har Gerizim and Har Avol are finding all kinds of stuff that they never thought they would ever find in a million years, showing that the people stood there and had some major center there, and they're thinking actually of rebuilding it. I was thinking, you're going to buy real estate. This is not too far from Yehuda and Shomron. It might be a good investment to look around there because you have a lot of history that takes place over there. After Har Gerizim and Har Avol, or actually before, you had, when they first entered the land, Yehoshua did a national bris. During the 40 years they were in the desert, Jews did not circumcise themselves. And this was a mass circumcision done by everybody. They also came in around the month of Nisan. They had the first carbon Pesach in the land of Israel that they did. Having the Mishkan, the Jews brought that. Also, when they entered Israel, the manna, the man stopped when they came in. And they didn't have food because they came in on Pesach, before Pesach, until the second day of Pesach, when the new grain was allowed to be eaten. Because they then brought the Omer, which we talk about between Passover and Shavuos. You have the Omer offering, which we now do by counting every day. For the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuos, we count the Omer. Back then, they brought a Korban Omer on the second day of Pesach, and it was after that that you could start eating any of the new grain that was harvested, and that's what they started doing. The first conquest that is mentioned in Yehoshua, and I didn't want, unless you guys want to, we can go perek by perek through the Sefer itself, but I thought I would just refer to the various chapters, which you can read on your own. But you start dealing with Yericho, the story of how they conquered Yericho, which is one of the major conquests, because at the time, all the major nations that were there and around were thinking of ways of what they could do to stop the Jews. And they made a stand at Yericho. All the kings, most of the 21 nations' kings were in the city of Yericho. And Yericho was this mighty, fortified fortress of a city with walls. And they thought they were safe there. And that's where the Navi tells us the story about how Yehoshua got all the Jews to circle the city 7 times, and they said certain verses, and they blew the shofar, and as the song says, in Jericho, the walls came tumbling down. And this is how they did it was probably one of the most significant conquests that Yehoshua did, because this basically told everybody we're here, and there was that. Perek Ches, you talk about Achon. Achon is one of the first of the major obstructions that we had, where he told nobody, Yehoshua had told everybody, you can't take anything from the spoils, and yet Achon had pocketed some, and they lost some battles after that, and Perek Ches, they win. Perek Tes, you get the Gibeonites, the Gibeonim fooled the Jews in terms of making believe they converted to withstand the attack from the Jews, and they happened to get away with it, but they were outcast. The Jews honored, even though the conversion was not really true, the Jews honored it as they went along, and that worked for them. The next few parakim talk about conquering the south, conquering the north. The story in Perek Yud of one of the battles where Yehoshua was in the middle of the battle and he needed extra time and he davened, and that's where we have the miracle of the sun did not set and he had his extra time of daylight to complete his fight. The next few parakim talk about the different Canaanite kings that they conquered. And then afterwards, from Yud Dalet to Yud Tes, it talks about the splitting of the land, how each of the Shoftim and what the parameters were of their share in the land. That's Book of Yehoshua basically is about the land, coming in and grabbing the land over a period of about 20 years, maybe. All of Yehoshua is a period of 20, 30 years. I can work it out exactly. And then finally, at the end, you have at the end of Yehoshua, you have the establishment of what we'll call the Arei Miklat. You may recall from Chumash that Moses had set up the first 6 Arei Miklat, which were cities of refuge. The idea was that the Levites, did not get any shares in the land. They did not have boundaries of a portion of land like the other Shvatim. They were working in the Mishkan, later the Beis HaMikdash, and they were given cities to live in. So Moshe set up the first 6 cities for the Levites, 3 on one side of the Jordan, which eventually became Ruvain and 1.5 other Shvatim, and the other 3 were in the land itself, in Eretz Yisrael itself. And the idea behind these cities was that if an inadvertent killer, by accident, or anybody actually, anytime there was a homicide, the killer ran to one of these cities, and he was safe there until the court adjudicated the case. If the court found it was an accidental killing, then he was free to stay there and be safe from any family members. And if not family members, if the dead person didn't have family, the court would appoint specific people. I don't know, a good word in English would be revenge takers, or these were people who would carry out retribution to that killer. If it was intentional, if the court found it was an intentional homicide, it was murder and not manslaughter, they would then haul him out of the city and take him to the Beis Din and execute him, as was allowed by law. The cities of refuge were, and eventually there were 42. There were 6 that Moshe did, but here in Yehoshua, you see some of the other cities that were established around the country for these people. Now, the idea behind this is sort of exile within the land itself. Jews did not have prison. Prison is not a Jewish concept. You don't have prisons anywhere in the Torah, except Goyim had prisons. Yosef was thrown into an Egyptian prison and languished there for 12 years. But Jews did not have prisons per se in terms of grabbing somebody, isolating them, and cutting them off from community, cutting them off from work, cutting them off from normal living.
Could I interrupt and ask you something, Isaac? These people that were murderers that were found guilty of something of, they were not secluded from everybody else. They lived in a city.
Yes. The accidental murderers, inadvertent murderers.
Okay.
Intentional murderers were executed.
Executed with no recourse. In other words, so capital punishment was used. In other words,
yes, it was used, but only by certain sized courts. It was not like one judge somewhere could sentence you to death. In order to have a sentence of death, to hear a capital case, required 23 judges.
wow. Okay.
So that was a major, I guess, deterrent, for just wild executions.
Yeah.
And I wonder sometimes, how did they manage? And I guess people stayed in line. First of all, don't forget, until the destruction of the first temple, which wasn't until about 500 years BCE. So you have Shmuel here, lived at 890. So your first Beis Hamikdash was until 500 something. It was 300, 890, about 400 years was the first Beis Hamikdash. You had open and obvious signs of Hashem being with us. We can't comprehend what it meant to live at a time like that. When you went to the Mishkan, or later even the Beis Hamikdash, and they brought a sacrifice, and you saw columns of smoke going straight up, and no flies around the animals, despite all the thousands of animals that were slaughtered in the outdoors. You had no smell, you had no flies, you didn't have pests. There were different ways that Hashem manifested himself that it really became obvious. If you wanted to see a manifestation of God, you could see it. And I guess that sort of held people in line somewhat, not to sin too badly. But the idea of taking somebody and isolating them in a cell, call it, nowadays you might even call it to be, whatchamacallit, in, what do they call it? In isolation.
Cherem.
What?
You talking about in Cherem?
No. I'm talking about in the Goyish world.
Oh, in the Goyish world. I see. Okay. Isolation.
Isolation. When they keep you in a cell, locked up, they punish you.
Solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement. There we go. We had no such thing. And we had no such thing of even depriving a person of years, locking them away and letting them languish. The idea behind the Arei Miklat, these cities were, first of all, they were cities of Levium. The Levium were then the teachers. The way we consider the rabbis now, these were the guys who carried on and taught Torah. The Levium and the Kohanim, the ones who collected their Meiser and Truma, and that the Jews gave a portion of their yield to, were the people teaching them Torah. And when somebody got sent to an Arei Miklat, the Gemara tells us, he did not go alone. They sent his Rebbe with him. So you provided for physical nourishment. You provided for social engagement. The guy was basically allowed to stay within that city and interact. The city were mostly teachers and better people, we would think, if the Levium were mostly living there. And so he was in an exile, but even as an exile, he was part of a vibrant community, so that there were people there to teach him, nurse him, help him along. And then when the Kohen Gadol died, he was free to go. Otherwise, he lived his life in this Ir Miklat and was provided for there until he died. And that was the way we dealt with non-capital punishment for inadvertent killers. So the rest of Yehoshua talks about them setting up these various Arei Miklat and talking about just basically the assembly, the way the Jews were starting to live in the time of Yehoshua. But these are the years we're talking about. The Iron Age, going up till about 1273 is Yehoshua. That's when he lived. And you had the Zakanim, and then later you had Shoftim, which is the next volume. Wow, an hour flies by quickly. Any thoughts?
Yeah, at the very
Anybody
end.
like this? You want to continue this tomorrow? You
Yeah.
want to do something different? You
No, no.
tell me.
I like what you're doing. I mean, it's fascinating, and I had no idea that that we started history.
No,
Oh,
there were history. There were people who, in terms of recorded history, yes, we had the most complete set of writings. I mean, I'm not talking about business transactions. The Egyptian papyri had a lot of business transactions, but in terms of spiritual teachings or history or recorded history,
But the ethics, we taught ethics, didn't we?
we did. Doesn't mean that there weren't other concepts of ethics around.
Yeah.
I mean, you
We
had
have a code of Hammurabi.
the Code of Hammurabi, and other people had various codes that were man-made. The difference was we received, I mean, look, people did what they did as they did. There was no public manifestation of God in this world until Sinai. I mean, you had
I think this is a wonderful overview.
may have had a personal miracle done for them, but there was no public manifestation of God's being with us or anywhere until Matan Torah in the year 2448. And that was the one and only time that God manifested itself, himself, herself, however you want to describe it, to the public. We say to the Jews who were surrounding Har Sinai, we also say to the world was aware or became aware of the giving of the Torah. And that was the one and only time you had a public manifestation to the entire world with Hashem saying, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and giving the 10 Commandments. I mean, I could spend a few classes just talking about the complexity of the 10 Commandments. We take it as 10 rules. It is far more than 10 rules. The later commentaries talk about how you can combine the entire Torah in those 10 commandments. And I can show you parallelisms that will become obvious to yourself in terms of the way they're set up. I mean, we know there were 2 luchos, right? And we know that we say that the first 5 were rules of Ben Adam Lamakom, rules governing our relationship with God. I am your God, have no other. Don't use my name in vain. Rest on Shabbos. And honor your father and mother. Those are the rules ben Adam lamakom. Now you may ask, honor your father and mother, how is that between you and God? And the answer is, it's a manifestation of you and your creator. It's the essential, I don't know, to boil Judaism down to its simplest form. We know we were created by God, and therefore you owe something to God. He gives you things that you never asked for, but you basically have an obligation, you owe something to the one who created you. And therefore, our work after that is avodas Hashem. If anyone asks, what's your purpose in life? It's basically to serve God as best you can. Now, we also know we get rewarded for it. The idea of mitzvos and olam haba and everything else is a very nice inducement. But the reality is, you open your eyes in the morning, how and why? And do you owe anybody anything for that? So if you take God as a living thing that created you and maintains you, your life is basically spent trying to do right by your creator. And therefore, kaberes avicha v'yasimecha, it's your earthly creators. God sort of hands down some of his honor that you are supposed to give to your earthly creators as well as. The next 5 are all ben adam lechavero. Don't kill, don't steal, don't give false witness, don't adultery, no adultery. And the 5th one is lesachmo, no wishing, don't
Envy.
It's a bad word, envy, because envy doesn't just mean you see a guy going by in a Cadillac and you say, I wish I had that Cadillac. Envy really is, when you start looking at the Aseres Dibros this way, a self-abnegation, meaning, that's why the Torah doesn't just say you shouldn't envy the guy's horse. The Torah gives you a shopping list. Don't envy him. Don't envy him for his wife, for his cow, for his horse, for his this. Gives you a whole shopping list of different things. What you need to have a list of possessions that you should envy? And the answer is no. That kind of envy is where you're not only wishing for the other guy's stuff, it's showing that you wish you were him.
Yeah.
You're somehow feeling incomplete compared to him. So it's a much heavier type of envy than wishing you had the same kind of house he has or the same kind of car he has. That's not what the Torah is talking about. It's talking about looking at the guy saying, boy, I wish I had this and I had this and I had this and I had this. What you're basically saying is, I wish I was him. I wish I wasn't me with what little I have. I wish I had all the stuff he has or enjoyed all the things that he enjoys. And that's why it's an important as that important to be one of your 10 dibros, one of your 10 commandments. Don't abnegate yourself. Don't dismiss yourself. Build yourself up to the point where you accept who you are and what you have and what God has given you, and be content with it. That's why I say the highest level. Ezehu Ashir, who is a rich person, Hasameach Bechelko, that is happy with his lot. So we can get into the 10 dibros also. We're already running way late. Nobody runs this late. Anybody here besides Susan that's interested in anything?
Just one of the 21 years, I think after 14 years, Yehoshua actually began the divvying up of the land.
Right, and that's what the end of Yehoshua is, showing how they divvied it up. Now, they constantly had harassment from the Pelishtim. They never fully conquered all of the land that originally was described to Moshe. And you had various people who were sniping at them. The Pelishtim were one. There were other tribes in the area who were giving them headaches. But the essence of the land was theirs for, I'd say, close to 1,000 years. You had the Mishkan, which was a total of about 600 years between where it traveled later and where it was moved around. And you get very interesting stories later in...
I thought it was 369 years.
I'm sorry?
I thought it was 369 years.
The Mishkan.
Yeah.
That was at whatchamacallit, at Shiloh. It
Yeah.
was to be 69 years, but there were years before getting there. Whatever, was also about 400 something years. Then you had the first Beis HaMikdash, which was 420 or 410. One was 410, one was 420. I forget which was which. Then you had a 70-year gap, which was Bavel, and which was the story of Purim. The story of Purim took place during the 70-year gap between the first Beis HaMikdash and the second.
Wow.
And then you had the second Beis HaMikdash for 400 years, leading to the time of the Common Era beginning, and the Beis HaMikdash being destroyed in 70 AD, or 70,
CE.
the right letter, CE, right, is when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Amongst the Holocaust, I don't know what the actual numbers were, but considering the weaponry they had, it was a bloodbath that even made Nazi Germany, still by comparison.
So we don't know how many people lost their lives in that period. We have no idea how many.
No,
Jews?
nobody does. Nobody does.
Wow.
Nobody does. Ranges go definitely a few 100,000, if not into the millions. And one other thing, people don't even realize, you talk about the Roman Empire and everybody, the Jews were the biggest pain in the butt to the Roman Empire. The Jews were the only ones that successfully stood up to the Roman Empire.
That's true.
For many, many years, Rome expended so much effort, both in terms of pride and both in terms of maintaining control over the area, that they built monuments to say Judea Capta. Think about it. The arch in Rome was built as a celebration that we finally beat the Jews. So, you think of us in exile as, stateless and shiftless and moving around. When we had our land, we were known, we were feared, and We were there. We were a presence in many ways. Then Rome took us down, and the land itself, obviously, they went so bad that they renamed it Palestine in order to keep the Jews away. They forbade Jews from coming back to the land. They were so afraid that if the Jews got back together again, the kind of headaches they would make for them. So they did as much of an eradication as they could, dispersing the people, killing them, forbidding anything to do with Torah, forbidding them to come back to the land, destroying the temple. And Baruch Hashem, we didn't do too badly over 2,000 years since. And now we're back. And that's going to be an interesting question in and of itself when we say we're back. I personally am torn. I mean, someone asks, do you support Israel? I support Eretz Yisrael. I support the Jews in the land of Israel. And I try not to get into discussions on whether I believe in the Knesset or what kind of monkey business they're doing there, because we don't believe this is a government that we are supposed to have. So yes, I believe in the people, I believe in the land, and I believe in God. And I try to do the best I can with all of those. We are way over. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Any comments? Any questions?
Ezra had his hand raised.
No, I just wanted, Isaac, I think what you have to do is when you use it, again, just to remind you, when you use a Hebrew term, just translate it so that those who are not.
You can say my name. It's all right. I know.
No, so
Those who are not
Susan,
familiar with the
Susan,
Hebrew
it's not
language.
just you.
No.
And anybody
No, it's
else
not.
can offer, because I forget terms also.
Yeah,
So I'm not embarrassed about that. If you don't know a word I said or anything it is, say it. It'll be a review for the rest of us. It'll give everybody else a chance to correct me if I say it wrong. And it'll be good. Everybody will have a good time.
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right.